Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thank you for joining us. The clock is ticking on the Biden agenda. The president met separately with moderate and progressive Democrats in the Oval Office Tuesday afternoon. Also in attendance, Vice President Harris and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Leading voices from both sides focused on projecting unity in spite of their differences.
We understand where we are today, where our country is, and the needs we really have, and then the aspirations that we have further down the road. Let's do what we can do together. Let's get that piece of legislation agreed upon, that we can start working the framework of that and putting it together. That's going to take a little while.
A little while is a big ask for the White House as the days of the legislative calendar pass by. Senate Majority Leader Schumer nailed down a more concrete timeline for the framework of a bill to be ready.
We had a very spirited discussion at our lunch, passionate, strong, and there was universal agreement in that room that we have to come to an agreement, and we got to get it done and want to get it done this week.
Also of concern for the president, the economy. Its health will likely factor heavily into Democrats' ability to pass the Biden agenda after the midterms. It comes as former President Trump is going forward with a lawsuit against the National Archives and the House Capitol Riot Committee. The court's ruling could have an impact on a president's right to assert executive privilege for years to come. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki weighed in on the suit Tuesday afternoon.
Well, our view, and I think the view of the vast majority of Americans, is that former President Trump abused the office of the presidency and attempted to subvert a peaceful transfer of power, something that had happened between Democratic and Republican presidencies for decades and decades throughout history. The former president's actions represented a unique and existential threat to our democracy that we don't feel can be swept under the rug.
Let's bring in Weijia Jiang, Ed O'Keefe, Alayna Treene, and Catherine Lucey. Weijia is CBS News senior White House correspondent. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Alayna is a congressional reporter for Axios, and Catherine is a White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to you all. Ed, let me start with you. What makes today's meetings with moderates and progressives different from the many meetings before, and do we know how they went?
The urgency, mostly, Elaine. The White House has signaled in recent days, the president himself has signaled since late last week, that this is about it. It's put up or shut up time, and they expect the deal to come together quickly. I think what you heard from Senators Manchin and Sanders today about the idea that they are close to possibly coming together on an agreement that the Democratic caucus of the Senate could agree to is a sign that the finishing touches may be put on this deal. And the fact that the president himself has essentially cloistered himself at the White House this week for these kinds of meetings to talk not only to the two groups that came by today, but then separately with Senators Manchin and Sinema, it's a sign that they're really trying to get him, the vice president, the Treasury Secretary, congressional leadership, and then some key moderates and progressives who signal how dozens of their colleagues could vote one way or the other together to put the finishing touches on what ultimately could get passed. White House, these meetings essentially just wrapping up, but so far, based on the public statements of the lawmakers who've stepped out of them, looks like pretty positive, and I suspect we'll get more in the coming hours into tomorrow morning about where exactly the talks are headed.
All right, we should mention Ed's coming to us from Virginia, where he's covering the gubernatorial contest. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But Weijia, you just heard from progressives who attended that meeting. What did they have to say?
Well, Ed's right. They're all signaling optimism that they are making progress. But what they didn't have to say is very many details about what that progress looks like. We asked them if there's a bottom line figure that they've agreed to, that they know that moderates have also signed on to. And they're still talking about that range that we've been discussing for weeks now, which is $1.9 to $2.2 trillion. We asked about any specific policies or programs that are non-negotiables that will definitely make it and will not be cut, because that is what the president wants. And they're just really hesitant right now to talk about any specifics because they're in the process of trying to bring this home. So I asked Congresswoman Jayapal, who you see right there, how they view the president and what his role is right now as they are trying to approach the finish line. And she said he's the closer, he's the convincer in chief, he's the mediator, he's really the person who's supposed to be bringing these two sides of his own party together. together to try to find a deal, but we don't know when that will be. They aren't talking about deadlines. Of course, the House Speaker has set October 31st for when she would like to see something pass, but then it has to go to the Senate. So it really, it depends on when these negotiations can actually take a step forward. But right now, what I'm not hearing is anything of substance when it comes to how they are taking those steps.
Interesting. Well, Catherine, Democrats seem to be sticking to an October 31st deadline for passing a spending bill. Does it seem attainable?
Certainly, that's a date that's been laid out, but you did not hear the press secretary committing to that today. One thing to think about, though, in the next 2 weeks that is adding pressure to these negotiations is that the president is scheduled to leave the country, to go to two international summits in Rome and in Glasgow. And I think he would very much like to be able to leave with being able to show that he has made progress on this deal, particularly in the space of climate negotiations, because that summit in Scotland is a climate summit, and he'd like to go there showing that he is making progress in the U.S. in that area. So that adds another wrinkle to this. But yes, as we just said, we have not yet heard a clear path forward. They're signaling optimism. They're signaling they'd like to get this done. But there is both the top line number to agree to and then all of the pieces to this. There's a lot of buckets to this deal in terms of climate, the care economy, the healthcare provisions, and so forth. And so they still have to actually decide what's in, what's out, for how long. And those things have not been nailed down yet.
Well, Alayna, Senators Manchin and Sanders have fought, sometimes publicly, over the spending bill, yet Monday evening they posed for pictures together. Have they made any moves toward a compromise?
Moves toward a compromise might be a generous term, but they are trying. They had a meeting last night, Monday night, to kind of hash out some of their differences. And let me be clear, the differences are still really far apart and still holding up this broader agreement. And it really is coming down to Senator Sanders, a socialist from Vermont, and Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia. They are very far apart on some of these key sticking points in this bill. And that's what is really going to determine how fast they can get this done. I think that, we have been hearing from the White House, from Democratic leadership on the Hill, that their patience is wearing thin. Schumer said today, coming out of their Senate Democratic lunch, that they want to have a consensus on a framework at a minimum on this deal by Friday. It's still ambitious, just given how much ground they still need to cover. And so it really is Senators Sanders and Manchin, and of course Senator Sinema as well. She went to the White House to speak with President Biden today about some of her own sticking points in this bill, and that's really why we've seen the attention just circulate these three members. And I think the key here is, why focus just on a couple senators? Well, it's because in order to pass this bill, you need all 50 Democratic senators to support it. And so that's really what they're trying to do before they agree to, let alone what's in the bill, but also the top line number for it, which they still don't have.
Well, Weijia, the president heads to Scranton, Pennsylvania to sell his spending plan. And earlier today, the White House says despite the price tag, this will not add to the ballooning national debt. Let's listen to that.
I believe that Build Back Better will not add a dime to the national debt.
Correct, it won't.
Why should Americans believe that?
Because it won't. Go ahead.
What if taxes that he says he wants to, get more taxes in? What if it doesn't happen? What if the economy goes sour? Lots of things can happen. What are you're going to tell from up there future generations, not even born yet, that they're not on the hook for this? Is that right?
That's right, and hopefully you'll report accurate information yourself.
So, Weijia, is there independent evidence of the cost here and whether or not it could add to the national debt? And also, if you're going to sell something, but the details haven't been nailed down yet, how does that work?
Well, the one detail that the press secretary talked about today when I asked her what the red line was for the president is how they anticipate paying for this. And, you know, the one thing, when you put aside all the details, all the nitty-gritty of what's going to be in the package, the one thing that he will not budge from is that he says anyone making less than $400,000 will not see, you know, a tax increase to pay for this, that it's really focused on the wealthy and big corporations that will have to foot the bill. And that's why he's going to Scranton. He's going to make the case that for people who are in the working class, who are in the middle class, who don't meet that criteria, that this is for them. And, you know, that it's time for those who make more money to do more to help people so, you know, they can have the American life, the American dream that he sees for them. And so the press secretary said he will be going there to really try to make a personal connection, to talk with people about how he understands their plight and how difficult it is to make ends meet, even if they do have a job, which is why he'll be promoting this social network package. But it's also why, Elaine, that Secretary Yellen was in the room with him to crunch these numbers. I think it's difficult, as you mentioned, to talk about how you're going to pay for something when we don't know the exact breakdown, right, of everything and where the money will come from and all the pay-fors. But I think she's in the room to offer guidance because she has years of experience. She knows the tax codes, you know, left and right. And so she's there to answer those questions that we really don't know the answers to just yet.
Okay. Catherine, meanwhile, you have been covering the GOP's line of economic attacks against the White House on inflation and supply chain issues. How are Republicans planning to leverage that for the midterms?
That's right. Republicans have really seized on both of these issues that the White House is trying to work on. The White House, in recent weeks, we've seen them make efforts to try and deal with supply chain bottlenecks and issues that are affecting American consumers. They have for months been saying that they expect inflation pressures, which are sending prices up, to ease. But right now, those are real concerns for a lot of Americans. And Republicans have really latched onto this. And they're making the argument that heading into the holiday season, these issues could really affect Americans as they go to buy gifts, as they go to prepare for holiday celebrations. Now, the White House is pushing back. They argue that this year, a lot of Americans might be in a better place than they were a year ago, before most people were vaccinated, when we were still, dealing with the pandemic in a serious way. They think that people will feel better this year, and they are saying that they are trying to deal with these issues of inflation and supply chain. But this is certainly an economic argument that the GOP is looking to make. They are eager to make, and they think that this is a strong argument heading into next year's midterm elections if Americans continue to feel these pressures.
All right, and let's turn to state politics. You are in Virginia, as we said earlier. Right now, you had the chance to catch Republican gubernatorial candidate Glenn Youngkin on the campaign trail today and talk with some voters. Here's some of what one voter said about her concerns, specifically with education in the state. Let's listen to that.
Sitting in school board meetings. Our school board meetings are ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous they want to force vaccinate our children, ones who play sports, and all of our children eventually. Enough is enough. It's time that parents take it back, take control back of their schools, and we start teaching things like science and history and math and stop worrying about all these silly things like, equity and pronouns. No, I want my kid to go to school, say their name, and learn something.
It's really always so fascinating, Ed, to hear directly from voters. So how important is education for the Virginians that you spoke with today?
Oh, it's become a huge issue, especially on the Republican side. There was a debate a few days ago where the Republican in this race, Glenn Youngkin, and the Democrat, Terry McAuliffe, were discussing education matters, and McAuliffe said something along the lines of, I don't think parents should have a say in what gets taught to children in school, and something that he doubled down on in the days after the debate. Well, it's exploded into sort of issue number one, at least the Republicans believe it has, in an attempt to sort of galvanize parents across the Commonwealth and really parents across the country who we know have been showing up at school board meetings, town board meetings, protesting outside schools regarding mask mandates, the vaccination requirements, the idea that students were being taught from home, and then issues like what exactly is taught to them about American history. history, critical race theory or not, or elements of that, and concerns about transgender rights of students in classrooms. All of this to say that there's a concern among a segment of parents in this state that too much social policy may be seeping into education and not enough actual education itself. So that's a core group of supporters that Glenn Youngkin has been able to draw into his fold here in the closing weeks, something that has made this now essentially a single-digit contest between McAuliffe, who served as governor once before, and Youngkin, a self-funded Republican businessman and longtime GOP donor who has really caught up to him in most surveys. Remember, in Virginia, you can only serve one four-year term. You can run again later for a second one. That's what McAuliffe's doing. He cleared the Democratic primary field earlier this year and has campaigned ever since as a check on Trump-style Republican politics that could be enacted in this state, which in recent cycles has become a Democratic one. And it is the marquee race of the handful of odd-numbered year races that are being held across the country, gubernatorial, mayoral, congressional, and one that is going to be most closely watched by Democrats and Republicans for signs of what may or may not work in midterm elections across the country next year, similar to how the California recall and the messaging that was used there by Democrats and Republicans worked or didn't work with certain segments of the voters.
Well, Ed, you talked with Glenn Youngkin after his rally. Here's a bit of that.
So let me just be clear. There are no surrogates for me. I speak for me. And this is what you've seen down the stretch of this campaign, is that it's Glenn Youngkin campaigning. There's a lot of people who support me, but I am campaigning for me, not like my opponent, who is bringing anybody he can into Virginia because he knows that his campaign is sinking. And so he's bringing in every elected Democrat he can possibly find, many of them no one's ever heard of. And in fact, many of them didn't even win their elections. And so what you're going to see from me down the stretch, and it's been this way pretty much the entire campaign, is that I am campaigning for me. I have lots of folks who are supporting me and have said things good that are nice about me, but please recognize there is nobody who speaks for me.
So, Ed, why is he keeping his distance from Republican surrogates and from former President Trump?
Well, and that was the next question we asked him, is would you be willing to have the former president come and campaign for you? And he said, no, there's nobody else coming. I'm going to do this on my own. And the reason is obvious, because any campaigning alongside former president, people who worked for the former president, his prominent supporters, some of whom may face a contempt vote tonight in the House, Steve Bannon, draws those comparisons and allows Democrats to make the campaign less about issues like education, the economy, the response to the pandemic, and more about concerns that Trump-style Republicanism could once again control Virginia. That is something that won't work with swing voters that Youngkin needs to convince to vote for him in these closing days. Because if you look at recent CBS News polling and other surveys taken by other organizations, arguably, or in a case of our poll, statistically, the most unpopular political figure in the Commonwealth of Virginia is the former president, Donald Trump. While Joe Biden's numbers have slipped since last year when he won this state by 10 points, his numbers are about 50-50. Donald Trump is in the low 40s. Today, Terry McAuliffe starts running an ad across the state that reminds Virginia voters about what happened in Charlottesville back in 2017. That same summer that Joe Biden points to as the moment in which he decided he had to run, a moment that he exploited to his advantage over the course of the 2020 campaign. McAuliffe now making that same play, saying, do you want the people who did what they did in Charlottesville, inspired by former President Trump, who support Glenn Youngkin's campaign to run this state, or not? Democrats talking about the former president and what it could mean. Could Texas-style Republicanism be enacted in Virginia? Republicans focusing on local issues of concern, education, the economy, that are resonating not only with Republican-based voters, but with a growing number of independents that could determine who wins this race.
It's going to really be fascinating to see what of those issues actually brings out those voters and motivates them and animates them here. All right, Weijia Jiang, Ed O'Keefe, Alayna, Treene, and Catherine Lucey, thank you all very much.